War in Iran, but America pays at the pump. Picture this. A conflict breaks out in the Middle East. Missiles fly. Tankers slow down. Markets panic. And the next morning, an American family pays more for gas. That is how modern war works. It does not always begin in your neighborhood, but it often ends in your wallet. For most people, war sounds like a foreign policy story. It sounds far away. It sounds political. It sounds military. But for ordinary Americans, war can quickly become a money story. It shows up at the gas station. It shows up in the grocery bill. It shows up in airline tickets. It shows up in delivery costs. And if inflation rises again, it may show up in interest rates too. That is the part many people miss. A war near Iran is not only about bombs and borders, it is also about oil. And oil is tied to almost everything in the modern economy. So the real question is not just, what is happening over there? The real question is, how does it reach us here? And to answer that, we need to start with the world's energy map. Segment 2. The energy map. Why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much. At the center of this story is a narrow waterway called the Strait of Hormuz. Most Americans will never see it. Many have never heard of it. But financially, it matters to their lives more than they realize. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. It is one of the most important energy routes on Earth. A huge share of the world's oil moves through this one narrow passage. That means something very simple. If the Strait of Hormuz is threatened, the oil market gets nervous. And when the oil market gets nervous, prices move. This is why even a regional conflict can become a global economic problem. Because oil is not just a local commodity, it is a global commodity. And global commodities do not respect borders. If buyers fear disruption, they rush to secure supply. If shipping companies fear danger, insurance costs rise. If traders fear shortages, they bid up prices. In other words, the market reacts long before the average person even understands the geography. And that leads to the next question. If America produces a lot of oil now, why does America still suffer? Segment 3. Why America still feels the pain. The U.S. produces oil, but it cannot escape global prices. This is where many people get confused. They say, America produces oil. America is not as dependent on Middle Eastern oil as it used to be. So why would conflict near Iran hurt the U.S. economy? Because oil is priced globally. That is the key. America may produce a lot of energy, but it still lives inside a global pricing system. If global oil prices rise, American consumers still feel it. Think of it like this. America may have its own supply, but it does not live on its own island. It lives inside a world market. If supply routes become dangerous, prices rise everywhere. If other countries compete harder for safer barrels, prices rise everywhere. If risk increases, the price includes that risk. And once oil gets more expensive, that extra cost does not stay inside the oil industry. It spreads outward. It moves through transportation. It moves through manufacturing. It moves through food distribution. It moves through shipping. It moves through daily life. So no, America does not need to directly lose access to Middle Eastern oil to feel the pain. It only needs one thing: higher global oil prices. And once that happens, the next stage begins. Oil stops being just an energy story. It becomes an inflation story. Segment 4. When oil becomes inflation. Gas, food, flights, shipping, and everyday costs. When people hear that oil prices are rising, they usually think of gas stations first. And yes, gas is the most obvious effect. But it is far from the only one. Oil is built into the structure of the modern economy. It powers cars, It powers trucks. It powers planes. It moved ships. It helps produce plastics, chemicals, packaging, and fertilizer. So when oil prices rise, that increase spreads. First, you may see it at the pump. Then you see it in trucking costs. Then in airline tickets. Then in grocery prices. Then in delivery fees. Then in packaged goods. Then in restaurants. Then in everything that depends on transportation and logistics. That is why energy inflation is so dangerous. It does not stay in one place. It enters the economy like water entering a basement, quietly at first. Then suddenly, it is everywhere. This is especially painful for American families because many of them are already under pressure. Rent is high. Food is high. Insurance is high. Credit card balances are. Segment 5. The Fed Problem. Why higher oil can keep interest rates higher for longer. This is where the story becomes even more serious. Because if oil pushes inflation higher, the Federal Reserve may have a harder time cutting interest rates. And that matters a lot. Americans have been waiting for relief. They want lower borrowing costs. They want easier mortgage rates. They want less pressure on credit cards, car loans, and business loans. But if inflation stays hot, the Fed may decide it cannot relax yet, and that creates a painful chain reaction. War raises oil. Oil raises inflation. Inflation pressures the Fed. The Fed keeps rates higher for longer. Higher rates hurt housing, business, investment, and consumer confidence. This is the domino effect. A war overseas can make home ownership harder in America. A shipping disruption can keep mortgage rates painful. A spike in oil can push the dream of cheaper borrowing further away. That is why this is not just a geopolitical story. It is not just a commodity story. It is a household finance story. A young couple trying to buy their first home feels it. A small business trying to borrow money feels it. A family carrying credit card debt feels it. A worker trying to afford a used car feels it. And that is the cruel part. The battlefield may be far away, but the financial damage arrives locally. Now step back for a moment, because this is not the first time history has shown us this pattern. Ancient thinkers understood something important long before oil markets and central banks existed. Segment 6. Ancient Wisdom. Long wars drain nations. Long before modern finance, long before Wall Street, long before central banking, people already understood that war has a hidden cost. Sun Tzu warned that no nation benefits from a prolonged war. That lesson still matters. In ancient times, long wars drained grain, labor, horses, metal, and the strength of the people. Today, long wars drain budgets, fuel supplies, confidence, supply chains, and household savings. The tools have changed. The truth has not. A short conflict can shock a market. A long conflict can wear down an entire society. Slowly, quietly, month by month, bill by bill. That is the deeper danger. It is not only the first spike in oil. It is the long, grinding pressure that follows. A nation may look strong on the outside, but if families are becoming poorer, more indebted, and more anxious, a nation may look strong on the outside, but if families are becoming poorer, more indebted, and more anxious, the economic damage is already spreading. This is one of the oldest lessons in history. War does not only consume armies, it consumes resources. It consumes confidence. It consumes the future. And in the modern world, one of the clearest signs of that damage is this. Ordinary people feel like they are working harder just to stand still. That is when a financial story becomes a moral story. Because once the pressure rises, a deeper question appears. What is a nation serving? People? Peace? Stability? Or power, profit, and fear? That brings us to the final lesson. Segment 7. Biblical warning and final message. Money is a tool, but a nation gets lost when money becomes the master. The Bible says you cannot serve both God and money. That line is powerful in times like this because money itself is not evil. Money can build homes. Money can feed families. Money can create safety. Money can help people. But when money becomes the master, everything starts to bend around it. Truth bends. Mercy bends. Priorities bend. And eventually, people bend too. That is what economic conflict reveals. It reveals what a society truly values when pressure rises. When oil becomes a weapon, when energy becomes leverage, when markets become fearful. The real test is not only economic, it is moral. Jesus also said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." In plain words, what you value most will eventually control you. And that applies to nations too. If a nation values only profit, it will sacrifice people. If it values only power, it will ignore the cost paid by ordinary families. If it forgets wisdom, it will confuse short-term gain with long-term strength. So what is the practical lesson for the average American? Do not panic, but do pay attention. You cannot control Iran. You cannot control the Strait of Hormuz. You cannot control oil traders. You cannot control global politics. And you cannot control the Federal Reserve. But you can control your own financial discipline. You can avoid living too close to the edge. You can reduce high-interest debt. You can build emergency savings. You can think before reacting. You can prepare before the next shock arrives. Because the wise person does not wait for the storm to begin. The wise person prepares while the sky is still darkening. And that, because the wise person does not wait for the storm to begin. The wise person prepares while the sky is still darkening. And that is the final lesson of this entire story. A conflict with Iran may begin with missiles, ships, and headlines. But for many Americans, it may be felt through gas prices, grocery bills, interest rates, and financial stress. That is how modern war works. It does not always knock down your door. Sometimes it simply raises the price of everything around you. So the next time oil jumps, do not see it as just another market headline. See the chain. War, oil, inflation, interest rates, debt, stress, household pressure. That is the real battlefield. Ancient wisdom warned that long wars drain nations. Biblical wisdom warns that money must remain a tool, not a master. And today, both lessons still stand. Because when oil becomes a weapon, the first person wounded is not always on the front line. Sometimes, it is an ordinary American trying to make it through another month.